Hello, y'all. So here we are. We're going to go as long as this thing doesn't white out. The Last Christmas Cowboy. Ready for some more? Yeah, that's the stopping point, but let's start going before this thing whites out on us. So, page 65. Rose muttered as she went back into the living room to go hang her coat up on a peg. As soon as she touched the hook by the door, it opened, and in walked Logan, looking red-faced and cranky as she felt. "It's effing freezing out there," he muttered. "No kiddin'." They both quit moving, and suddenly they were just standing there, staring at each other, very close together. The warm air in the room seemed to expand between them, and the space it just felt as like it was their last conversation settled there and just stayed there. "You aren't thinking about the fact that you're talking about someone being with you, Rose. It's physical, hands, mouth, teeth." "There's Stu," she said, the statement falling out of her mouth and sounding exceedingly lame. "Good," he said, his rough voice probably from the cold winter air. "I'm starving." "Me too." Neither of them moved. Rose realized that she was going to have to eventually, but it felt like the air was made of molasses, and like the floor might be covered in a thick layer of muck, the kind that was mostly clay and sucked your boots down in the deep, making it difficult to take a step. Something was holding her there. And as she had the oddest sensation, her stomach was turning over inside her body, and when her something lashed in Logan's blue eyes, and she had to ask herself if it was mud, molasses, or the deep blue that reminded her of the summer sky holding her in that spot. His eyes were familiar, much like the beauty of the ranch around her. She woke up and saw those eyes each and every day. She didn't even think about them consequently, but she was considering them now, deeply as they considered her, and she was wondering, what would he teach her? What would he teach her? "Dinner?" she squeaked. "Yep," he said. His voice was thick like the air in the floor. She swallowed and turned away from him, making her way towards the dining room. She would hear heavy footfalls of his boots behind her. Pansy West and West's half-brother Emmett had decided to join them for dinner, which meant it was a fully fair house. Rose liked this. It reminded her of being a kid in spite of everything. It was a good memory for her. She had missed her parents terribly, even though those years where grief had been sharp, cutting before it was even dull to ache, wrapped itself around her soul and become part of what she was. She hadn't felt alone. She had missed her parents, but she had known that she wasn't an orphan, not really, not in the way those poor sad kids are in that one movie. They were always singing around while scrubbing the floors. She got to live in her house. She had brothers, she had her sisters, cousins, even Logan. There had been a huge amount of security in that, because something in her had felt that confident that she was always going to have them. Yes, she had experienced loss, but this place was hers. This house was hers. These people. It was the thing that sustained her, preserved her. They chipped cups and plates, noisy get-togethers, and animals running all around. The sweet, nostalgic mist was a lot more comforting than the moment in the entryway when Logan's familiar eyes had become something else entirely. That was 65, 66, 67. Here's 68. "Arrest any bad guys?" Rose asked, sitting in the empty seat next to Pansy. "No," she said. "I did have to tell off a deer that got into Mrs. Nita Meyer's pond. I can't believe she has the nerve to call you and ask you to help her out, after she actively tried to keep you from getting your job," Rose said. Barbara Nita Meyer was a whole nother problem. A city council person with too much attitude, in her opinion. She knew that Barbara had it hard, with her son struggling with addictions issues and her husband leaving her a few years earlier, but that wasn't an excuse. She had tried to encourage Pansy to arrest Wes's younger brother, who had been causing a bit of trouble. Granted, the poor kid was all alone in the world. Rose had endless sympathy for that kind of thing, considering she hadn't been alone because of the way her siblings had rallied around her. West and Emmett had been raised together, and while they had a huge age difference, but of course once West had realized the situation Emmett found himself in, he'd taken the kid in under his wing. At the same time, Pansy had been starting a relationship with West and had been up for the job of chief of police. Barbara had been opposed to both lenience for Emmett and the Pansy getting that job. Rose was still mad about it. "Oh, you know, Barbara," Pansy said, "I'm not supposed to take it personally. It was what she believed in, and she dug her heels in on it. But now things are different, and she's learning to adapt. If I were you, I would leave her garden and her pond to the deer." "Yes, but it's better than that. Pansy's not bloodthirsty as you are," Sammy pointed out, considering her position. Rose shrugged. "I'm not bloodthirsty. I just believe in listening to people when they tell you who they are and how their actions show." "You're suspicious," Iris said naturally. "I am not either." She was a little, but parts of her childhood had been marked by visits from Child Protective Services who had some natural concerns about Ryder handling the stress and grief of losing his parents and taking care of all the children. Even though they always had been on the Daniels' side, Rose had always felt a little bit naturally suspicious. It was her deepest fear, the loss of the safety net. She had placed all of her trust in it, even when she had discovered how harsh and cruel the world could be. Losing her parents, her aunt and her uncle, Logan's mother, they had been left with each other, and she had been sure of every level but the deepest one that meant the world that would be together. But it was the core of her, the deepest part of her heart, that she feared losing in this too. So yeah, she always had a little bit of suspicion when it came to stern-faced older women, particularly ones that had power within the community. Not fair, she knew, but it was the sense that they had power over her life that bothered her. Maybe a bit, she conceded. Maybe I just didn't like the way she took after Pansy or Emmett. Emmett shrugged. She's not so bad. I got to plant her flowers for a couple of times since then at the community center and at her house. 68, 69, here comes 70. We felt it was the right thing to do considering he broke into her car, West said. Emmett looked sheepish. I can't believe I have to say this, but after I finish this sentence, we're going to have to stop. Emmett looked sheepish. I did, he muttered. I still think she's a battle axe, Rose said, reaching to the center of the table and taking a generous ladle of stew, S-T-E-W, pouring it into her bowl. That was when she realized that all the bowls matched. And that's where we're going to take a time out.